So this is actually a talk. I've talked about it here and there at different means of communication, but this is probably the tightest I've had it. In the last, I gave this, I've only given this specific talk one other time before. It was at the NCA 2016 Personal Trainers Conference. I just left it on those slides. It's actually, I have to say, out of all the talks I've given this as a subject, bringing it to the fitness field, I have to say I'm probably most proud of, because I think it is the most important thing, yet it's not really talked about. And what we're really getting into now, the title on the booklet that you guys have is BS Detection for Personal Training. You know, it really comes down to this. So, you know, if you're doing something at a more academic conference like NSCA, you call it discerning quality information, right? Because there's a range. It doesn't mean that just because something is high quality doesn't mean something that's a little less quality is total BS. So it is a little bit of extreme to say, but it's sexier to say BS detection, right? So, but this is really what it's about. It's about how to detect bad evidence and avoid sloppy thinking. So here's the issue we have. People say, oh, there's too much information. No, there's not too much information. You go to your high school, if you're 50, 60 years old, or your grandparents or your great-grandparents, they went into the library, there was more books in that library than they could ever have time to read. They could have said the same thing. We just have more accessibility of information. All right, so it's not too much information, it's just there. So the problem that we have, the biggest concern, frustration, complaint that I get from trainers all the time, you know, I go all around the world and teach, and I get to deal with the best trainers, the people like you who are spending their extra time and money to come to these conferences and try to be their best and learn. It's not, I can't find information. It's, I don't know what to believe. Sometimes they say, I don't know who to believe. Right? And basically, we don't know how to sort through conflicting information. Now, you could try to take the neutral ground and go, well, there's a little bit of truth in everything. Okay, that's logically flawed right there. Sometimes it is. But if two people are making mutually contradictory claims, both logically cannot be true. Now, both can be wrong, but they can't both be right. Right? Now, there are some things that are a little bit more individual. But if somebody makes a claim about how the body works, or A equals B, or A does not equal B, that is an objective claim. If somebody else says A does equal B, both cannot be right. You can't play the, well, there's a little bit of truth in everything. No, somebody's got to be wrong in that case. All right? So what we're really going to go over here is, the other thing too is you can't stay ahead of things. There's so many new products, new forms and methods of training and assessment and evaluation and whatever. You can't be an expert in everything. This goes beyond, everything we're talking about goes beyond the fitness field. It goes into everything. So these are our objectives. Now I'm going to warn you about two things that I'm going to break all the rules of good presenter rules, whatever that is. Presenterdom. One, I have busy slides. Two, sometimes, on occasion, I will read off my slides. Now you saw me present yesterday, you've seen videos of me, you know that's not normally how I am. But in a presentation like this, there's so many things I want to get across that I put it up there just to make sure it's almost like a guideline for myself. All right? So here's what we're going to go. Here's what my objectives are. I want to try to help you see through the confusion by conflicting information by looking at information as not equal. Because if all information is equal to you, you're lost. I think Carl Sagan said that. Because you can't sort out the good from the bad. And reduce your chances of falling prey to erroneous beliefs and practices. Now right there, a lot of people reduce your chances. You mean you're not going to prevent me from believing bad stuff? No, it's impossible. Right? It's just like when people say, smoking doesn't, that smoking causes cancer. Well, I had a grandfather who smoked till he was 90. Those scientists don't know what they're talking about. Nope. They say smoking increases your risk. You see, there's little details. Wording matters. So we can't stop you from believing erroneous things. I promise you, we're all going to believe that. Me, right now, I can give you stories about writing my books and go, I'm wrong about this. I've written about it. All right, but you can at least build up a better skeptical filter to not let these erroneous beliefs and practices get into your head and set up shop as easy as they are. All right, so what we're going to do is provide you some skeptical thinking tips and basic questions to ask yourself, internal dialogue when you hear information, to help you filter these things. Basically, to help you elevate the level of validity and reliability of claims. That's it. Validity and reliability. And then also determine what is and what is not good evidence. And some of you guys are going to find this challenging, because a lot of things that you believe are good evidence are not. And also identify faulty logic. And then along the way, I want to try to clarify some myths and misconceptions about science and scientists and evidence and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So this is a quote from me at the top here. The health and fitness field, we're full of highly trained bodies and really poorly trained minds. Great trainers, horrible thinkers. Right? Now what I mean by horrible thinkers is critical thinking. Now I love this quote. This is not a new quote. I'm going to read it to you. Thinking is skilled work. It's not true that we are naturally endowed with the ability to think clearly and logically without learning how or without practicing. People with untrained minds should no more expect to think clearly and logically than people who have never learned and practiced can expect to find themselves good carpenters, golfers, players, pianists, so on. So let me tell you, we don't like to have arguments. And when I say arguments, I don't mean screaming arguments, emotional arguments, but disagreements. Right? You always hear that, oh, you don't talk about politics and religion and money or whatever. Those are the main things you should be talking about, because if no one ever challenges you, you think your bullshit is true. Right? And that's why we get upset when people challenge us, because we mistake our ideas for our identity. You're not your ideas. Ideas don't have rights, they don't have anything. People have rights. Right? You don't have to respect ideas, I have to respect you as a human being. Alright? It's like football coaches tell their players, I love you as a person, but your football sucks. I love you as a person, but your thinking sucks. Okay? So this is something that we have to confront. Now I'm going to prove it to you right now, that we're full of untrained bodies and poorly trained minds. This is not a trick, this is based off of social psychology research. It's been done over and over again. Now I want you, everybody who has a pen and paper, I want you to actually take a second to write down your answer here. If you don't, put it in your phone. Now I'm going to read it to you to make sure we're clear. This is not some sort of mind game, it's not some trick. I'm not going to make anybody look bad. So, this is called the Wason selection test. So listen very carefully. Each of these cards has a letter on the front and a number on the back. So obviously the two cards with the letters have numbers on the back that you can't see. The two that you can see with numbers have letters on the back. This is your task. I want you to determine whether all cards with a vowel on one side have an even number on the other. Now in order to demonstrate that based on those four cards, which two cards would you turn over? Let me read it to you again. Your task is to determine whether all cards with a vowel on one side have an even number on the other. You can pick up two cards to turn over. Which two cards would you turn? I'm going to give you like 30 seconds and write it down. Normally your first instinct is what you're going to stick with. Don't rush it. 30 seconds is a long time. A lot of you are looking at me, so you got it already figured out. Did you write it down? Write it down so we got some proof of this. Okay, how many picked the A and the 4? Okay, put your hand in. How many picked the A and the 7? It's the A and the 7. Now, A and the 4 are the most common response. The first time this study was done in 1972, it's been replicated many, many, many times over in different scenarios. Now you're thinking, what the heck? Okay, this demonstrates the problem in how we think. The A and the 4, if you find a vowel on that 4, and you find an even number on the A, you've only confirmed the previous idea. But in order to truly demonstrate that all cards, you'd have to turn that 7 over, and if that had a vowel on it, you just disconfirm the hypothesis. You see? So finding a vowel on the 7 disproves things. Now this is what's called a bias towards positive information. If you find a vowel on the 4, it only tells you about the cards you turned over. It tells you nothing about all cards. So you made a judgment about all cards based on not enough information. Now I see you guys going, oh, This is what our brains are wired to do. We take little evidence and jump to big conclusions. All right? We have a tendency to seek out information that only confirms our previous belief, and then we run with that because we think that demonstrated it's true. No, it did not. This is what we do in training, this is what we do in medicine, this is what we do in politics, religion, and every other aspect of life. All right? So if you truly want to know something is less wrong or more likely to be true, you have to look for disconfirmatory information. And the lack of that makes it more likely to be true. All right? This is a cognitive bias called the bias towards positive evidence. It's a version of a confirmation bias. We hear confirmation bias. The confirmation bias is an umbrella term for like 100 different versions of confirmation bias. There's all these fallacies, the sharpshooter fallacy, all these different things. All right, are we all clear on this now? So we just demonstrated poorly trained minds. Now what I wanted to bring up here is this point. It's not what you think, it's how you think. Now the big problem that we have in the field is that we want our mentors, teachers, to inject us with conclusions. We don't want to reason it out ourselves. Now when you learn math, you learn how to reason it out yourself. Think about even just learning basic addition. 2 plus 2 is this. Now if you say 2 plus 2 is 5, your teacher's not going to go, no it's not, it's 4, remember 4. Your teacher's going to go, well show me, reason it out. Show me on your hands. See, 1, 2, 3, 4. Show me your work. They're saying, show me how you thought. They don't just inject you with memorization. That's how thinking has to be. All right? So we want to teach you how to figure out the answers and sort through things. That's critical thinking. All right? So we got to stop thinking in conclusions and start looking at processes and premises. It's the first big mistake that we make. So I don't want you to tell me this is how things are. I want you to tell me why you believe that. And if you're talking politics and religion, you would try to understand before you argue. We have a tendency to argue before we understand. I want to look at the reasoning behind this person's beliefs, and then I want to evaluate the validity and the reliability of that. And when you do that, you don't get confused, because we just look at end results. So-and-so thinks this, so-and-so says this, I don't know who to believe. It becomes very easy to figure it out when you understand the processes one individual used versus the other. So some people are using more reliable and valid thought processes than others. So, go back for a second. So here, first thing, 3 tips for discerning quality information. First, I just told you, focus on the thinking processes someone uses, which comes with dialogue, not the conclusions they hold. Now why is this important? Because we'd all agree that if you use a less reliable thought process, if you're into philosophy, it's called an epistemology or epistemic process. It just means how do you come to know stuff. All right? Less reliable processes are more likely to lead you to less reliable conclusions. On the flip side, more reliable thinking processes are more likely to lead you to reliable conclusions. Now, occasionally the blind squirrel finds a nut, right? But even just look at it this way, when you think, what do you mean like a thinking process? Well, let's just use a kind of a silly analogy, but it makes sense. Let's say I want to get drapes for a new window in my apartment. I could just look at it and go, I think it's that wide. That's not that reliable. I could go up and go like, and go to Home Depot and be like, yeah, it's like this. It's more reliable than doing that, but still not very reliable. Or I can get a tape measure. Tape measure is the most reliable way of coming to know that. The more reliable method, the more likely I'm going to come to a reliable conclusion. All right? So not everybody is using the same level of processes to get to their conclusions, which means not all information or opinions are equally valid because of that. And that's what you have to look at. And I love this saying from Richard Dawkins. When two opposing views are expressed with equal intensity, the truth does not necessarily lie exactly halfway between them. It's possible for one side to simply be wrong. And then again, Carl Sagan, if all ideas have equal validity, then you're lost, because it seems to me no ideas have any validity at all. That's why you need critical thinking. It may make you uncomfortable, fine. You've got to get comfortable with that. Otherwise, you're going to be uncomfortable. You're going to be comfortable being confused all the time. So this is our epidemic. We got a lot of unreliable thinking processes. Now, we all have the same goal. And I heard this from somebody else that said this. I want to have as many true beliefs as possible and as little false beliefs as possible. Or in scientific, you would say less wrong. Right? Now here's the thing, we all believe things for reasons. Right? And we all think those reasons are good. But the challenging part is some of the things that we think are good are not, and we're going to go over some of those. Some of them are unreliable. You know, things we think there's good evidence or not, things that we think sometimes are common sense or faulty logic. Do you notice common sense is really relative to what you already believe? Right? Okay, so now, second tip. When you're evaluating a claim, this comes from the scientific method, start with the null hypothesis. If you don't know what that is, the null hypothesis is the default stance that all patterns are false, all claims are false, until demonstrated to be likely otherwise. Now you think, whoa, it's kind of negative, isn't it? We'll get to that. But this is the big thing. Should we start with the default belief that it's true and then find out otherwise with everything, especially when someone's up here at a conference? Right? We've already demonstrated by logic that if you hear two mutually contradictory points of view, somebody's got to be wrong. And if you go to conferences, you hear that all the time. So you already know that people sometimes get up here wrong. Why? We're human beings. It happens. All right? But here's why this is the most reasonable and open-minded position to start with when approaching claims. Who cares about the person saying it? Because if we begin, it's the last line, if we begin believing every claim is true until it's been shown to likely be false, two things happen. You're most certainly going to hold mutually contradictory ideas, and you're going to believe things that are false. You're not putting up much of a skeptical filter right there. All right, now, if you think this is negative, keep this in mind. Believing all claims are true until demonstrated otherwise, that's not being open-minded. That's called being gullible. All right, that's called being gullible. You know, an open-minded position here starts with evidence and logic and then evaluates the process and then comes to a conclusion from there. Not starting with a conclusion and backing into it and leading the evidence where you want it to go. That's what we have a tendency to do. So skepticism is not about doubt. It's about doubt, it's not about dismissal. That's the biggest myth about skepticism right there. Oh, you're just negative. You're one of those people that doesn't believe anything. I believe all kinds of things if the evidence is proportionate to it. But I'm not just going to believe it just because you said it. You want me to be credulous. So considering the evidence and logic and then rejecting it because it's insufficient relative to the claim is not the same as ignoring it. Who ignores counter-evidence? The people that go, I know what I believe. You're just not open-minded. That's the closed-minded position. The other person goes, I'm willing to change my mind if you can demonstrate sufficient evidence. Now, not every claim requires the same amount of evidence. If you tell me, I have a dog at home, that's a pretty ordinary claim. Ordinary claims need nothing more than ordinary evidence. No problem. I have no reason to believe that. If you tell me I have a flying dog at home, I need more than a YouTube video. Right? Because that is a pretty damn extraordinary claim. You see, not all claims need equal levels of evidence. You can easily doctor a YouTube video. So truly open-mindedness is willing to revise a belief when presented with new evidence that warrants it. And if you don't know what it takes to change your mind on something, you either are intellectually dishonest, or maybe or nothing will change your mind. That's closed-mindedness. So before you go into anything, you have to ask yourself this: and ask the other person this if you're having some sort of discussion. What would it require, what would you require to change your mind about this, or at least rethink your position? All right, third tip. This is basic kind of starting position default positions. Assume ignorance. The first person you assume ignorance is here. That you don't know what you don't know, essentially. And you assume ignorance in other people. Why? Because it's far more dangerous to assume someone, what am I going to say here? It's far more dangerous to assume people, including yourself, know what they're talking about than it is to assume they're unaware of their own ignorance, and then you let them prove you wrong by listening to what they have to say and politely asking questions. Like I said, try to understand before you argue. Why? It goes back to the null hypothesis thing. If you just believe that they're right, you're going to believe mutually contradictory stuff, and that's what we do. So-and-so's had success, so-and-so's up at the conference. You got to be right. Not all the time. We're still human. Now, how do they demonstrate that they're not ignorant or they're not unaware of their own ignorance? Because they can provide reasonable and sound thought processes to demonstrate their conclusion. Now, a lot of times what debates happen is in the processes that you use to come to the conclusion. That's what I'll debate you on. Okay, so now, I'm going to give you 7 questions, internal dialogue to ask, or external dialogue to ask people to help discern through quality information. The first one you knew was coming. It's not, this is just one question out of 7. Right? Is it based on good scientific evidence? Now, I gave you a couple different pyramids here, depending. The one on the left is actually from medical, like a nursing journal. The other one here, I can't remember where I got that from. But if you talk to scientists, they'll tell you that, obviously randomized controlled trials are probably the strongest evidence about something, but a meta-analysis, which is a study of studies, give you kind of an overview of what the preponderance of evidence says. But there's still some weaknesses there as well, which, study inclusion criteria, even one study that kind of goes against the 10 others will really kind of skew it a little bit. Nothing's perfect here, but it gives you a pretty damn good idea. So if someone's using meta-analyses and systematic reviews, that's certainly more reliable than just picking one study. All right, notice what's on the bottom here. This one is much more study-oriented. So animal and lab studies, like observational studies. Here, look. Opinion of authorities and experts, that's at the bottom. Single descriptive. I can see here, systematic reviews with descriptive qualities, but up here, randomized controlled trials. And then here is larger systematic reviews and metas and RCTs, or one well-designed RCT. I think this is probably one of the better pyramids. I don't see it used that often. It's more for medical. Now, I took this one from Brett, and I love it. Tradition, authority, trial and error, logic, reason, scientific methods at the top. Now, a lot of us say scientists can be wrong. Of course, scientists are biased, of course. But the scientific method is not biased. It's designed to tease out bias. A great example of bad science is Vioxx. That killed people. You know who showed us the bad science of Vioxx? Excuse my language, other fucking scientists. Not random alternative medicine people wandering around. That demonstrates science working. It teased it out. It has a process for filtering it out. Things aren't perfect, yeah. So scientists are biased, but the process is not. So it shows it works. If you don't have that process, it never comes out. Right? So at least what science does is gives us the best tool for offering probabilities, at least, that the likelihood of a claim is being true or false. It's all about probabilities. Not what's possible. Anything is possible. What's more probable? It's possible Santa Claus exists, but it's not probable.
You just killed my dream.
Yeah. I'm going to get the shirt, Dream Killer. Now, this brings us to this. How do you separate science from pseudoscience? Because this is a big confusion that a lot of people have. So what science does, it makes observations and reaches possible, probable, tentative insights, conclusions that may become, if there's enough evidence, a hypothesis that is then attempted to constantly be falsified. Can we find contradictory evidence? Where we go back to about the Wason selection test. The less likely you are to be able to falsify it, the more likely it's true. In the objective sense. The objective is the reality that we all share. Subjective is your internal taste. All right, so let's clarify this right off the bat. People say, oh, it's my truth versus your truth. Bullshit. Right? That's confusing subjective and objective reality. When it comes to subjective, your truth, that only counts in truth in matters of taste. I like pizza. I believe this. I feel this way when this happens. I like hugs. I don't like hugs. Whatever. You are infallible when it comes to your matters of personal taste. But that has nothing to do with the reality that we all share. Right? So you may believe that when you walk off this roof, you're not going to fall. Right? But the objective reality is you're coming down. That's the difference. We constantly confuse internal validation with external validity. The reality that we all share. And that's what science is looking at. Now what pseudoscience does is it stops at the observation and often takes it as proof of the conclusion. Now by the way, hypothesis in science is not hypothesis in everyday terms. We think it's, oh, that's a hypothesis, right? Or a theory. You know, it's called the theory of gravity, right? It really is. Well, it's just a theory. A theory in science is pretty heavy. It's not the same as I have this theory, you know, that there's a dragon in my sink, right? It's not the same thing. Now, here's the difference. It's human nature to think correlation equals causation. Anecdotal thinking, that comes naturally. Now, there's some evolutionary explanations of why this is. It's beyond the scope to get into it. But scientific and critical thinking, or skeptical thinking, which kind of is the umbrella term for it, that takes training, as we talked about earlier. The scientific method also requires patience, and we like quick answers. Right? So I love this little saying right here. Pseudoscience appeals by supplying a quick answer, usually based on small sample sizes, seldom accounting for things like placebo effect, or normally it's often the bias towards positive evidence. And I love this. I think I stole this from somebody. Like candy, it's tasty, but it's empty. We got a lot of people liking a lot of candy. And that's the biggest red flag, I would say, is when somebody, especially at a fitness conference, starts to claim that they have the answers to genuine areas of scientific ignorance, like what causes cancer. That's first red flag. Really? Like, dude, like you'd win the Nobel Peace Prize if you really knew what caused all kinds of cancer. And you're here at the fitness conference? Get the fuck out of here. All right? That's the biggest red flag. So pseudoscience promoters begin with a belief and find ways to make that approach seem scientific. Now this brings me back to something. Well, Nick, you can find evidence to support anything. All right? I'll come back to that in a second. That's called cherry picking. That's not good science. You probably could. But what does the other evidence say? What does the counter evidence say? Which one weighs more? Which one, where does the preponderance of evidence point? That's what it's all about. That's why systematic reviews and meta-analysis are good. Because they talk about what the preponderance of evidence says. Now, a quick little shameless self-plug. I wrote an article for a website called Shredded by Science. and it's called Responses to the Top 10 Arguments Against Science-Based Training in Nutrition. I invite you guys to check it out. Like, I basically addressed counter-arguments to all the common things that I hear. And they're legitimate concerns. It's okay. We're all just trying to look out. We all just want to get as close to the truth as possible. But some of the legitimate concerns are not as reasonable as they appear. All right. So follow the weight of the evidence where it leads. Don't lead it where you want it to go. And going back to that Wason selection test, we find something that confirms and then we're done. No, see, you can find disconfirmatory evidence. All right, now, the other one is the claim based on anecdotal evidence. I share anecdotes all the time. I'm going to just bracket that for a second, come back to it. Here's the problem. When people who are often basing their practices off of anecdotes, they often cite their personal experiences or the personal professional experiences of their colleagues and mentors. So one, discredit the science, and two, convince the rest of us that their beliefs about whatever method they use are true. They may be true, but we just can't go by that because you can't just rely on in-practice experiences because you don't know if the people who are making those claims haven't misinterpreted, misremembered the evidence of their own experience. And we're wired to do that. We just showed you with the Wason selection test. You could have a bias towards positive evidence. There's lots of ways to misinterpret things. Now, I love this one. I know what I saw. I go, you probably do. You ever see a magic show? You really think that magician just disappeared and floated off stage somewhere else? No, they're playing with these cognitive biases in your brain. You don't think that happens to you on a daily basis? It absolutely does. You just don't acknowledge it. All right? So you have everything that you've done in a day. Let's say you do something that makes your back pain go away. And you go, oh, well, because I did this, my back pain go away. Well, how do you know it wasn't the coffee you drank? How do you know it wasn't how you slept? How do you know it wasn't the workout that you did? How do you know it wasn't the time of day that you worked out? You can eliminate those other things. That's why you have to do controlled studies. Now, here's two ways that some ineffective, otherwise ineffective intervention can appear to be effective to otherwise intelligent human beings like everybody in this room. And we're all guilty of this. First is regression to the mean. Now just bracket that for a second. Who here has heard of the Madden curse in football game? Somebody tell me what the Madden curse is. Go ahead.
Like whoever's on the cover of a Madden game ends up having a really bad season and getting hurt.
Yeah, we're getting hurt. Yeah. Did you hear that? Whoever makes the cover of the Madden football game that year, the following year, ends up getting hurt or having a mediocre, not that great of a season, right? Now, what gets them on the cover of Madden? They had a standout season. Okay. Well, in football, injuries are 100%. It's not a matter of, it's just a matter of if, right? It's a matter of when. And inevitably, if you have a breakout season the prior year, other teams are going to key in on you, double team you, do whatever, scheme you up, and you're going to go back to having a less, even if you're a great player, you still have a standout season from a relative. That's a statistical reality called regression to the mean. When things are at their extremes, low or high, they're always going to kind of come back to the middle. But we don't know this, so we assume some sort of curse. Oh, you're on a video game, so it's the curse. No, it's not. It's just regression to the mean. It's normal. It's a failure to take into account natural and inevitable fluctuations of things when ascribing causes to them. That's a statistical term. It's a reality that happens to us all. Used to be, by the way, used to be called the Sports Illustrated curse. All right? The fact is, we just don't understand this stuff. All right, now, ascribing causes to them. This is called the post hoc fallacy. Right? It's actually short for some Latin term. It's like post hoc ergo propter or something like that. It just means this. After this, therefore because of this. Rain happened after we did dance, therefore rain from rain dance. All right? That's the nature of superstitious thinking, by the way. Right? So it's the natural assumption that you tend to have that simply because one thing happens after the other, the first event was a cause of, or at least influenced, of the second event. Right? That's post hoc thinking. Now, let's put this in some real terms. Who in here experiences low back pain? I don't. Raise your hand up high. Okay. Do you agree, or have you experienced that sometimes you have good days, good weeks, bad weeks? Yeah? Most people, yes? Good. Okay. So good weeks would be high up, bad weeks would be down here, and then sometimes it's kind of iffy. That's your mean. All right? So, we just said, things like low back pain unfold in a non-uniform manner, sometimes with episodes of higher pain and then episodes of improvement. Sometimes it's mild. All right? Now, what normally do you do when you have those periods of bad pain? You go try to seek out some sort of intervention. Well, we just determined that if you have a bad week or bad day, what's going to happen? You're going to maybe have a good week or you're going to regress to the mean. So we guaranteed you're going to get better, regardless. And then you get better and you go, well, I know it was because of that thing I did. Nope. You just used post hoc thinking and you didn't understand regression to the mean. So it's those periods of relief that give rise to erroneous perceptions of a treatment's effectiveness, whether the treatment actually is effective or not. That is why you say, I see it working. You absolutely see a result. You just don't know if it's because of that or not. And that's why we got a lot of otherwise smart people doing really ineffective stuff, and when they read research about it since it's ineffective, they go, I don't care what that science says, I know what works for me. No, you don't. You only know a conclusion, you only know an experience. You don't necessarily have the right reason as to why. And maybe that wrong reason that you have is really helping somebody else buy a new Porsche. All right, now if you want statistics on this, here's low back pain statistics. The stats on low back pain show that most cases of nonspecific low back pain are self-limited, usually begin to improve within 2 to 5 days and typically resolve within 2 to 4 weeks with tolerable exercise. Different study. Many individuals may not seek medical care for back pain because episodes are typically brief. For patients with acute low back pain, 75% to 90% report improvement in 1 month. You're going to get better anyway. Okay, now, I like to see I quote myself every once in a while, it adds credibility to my argument. I don't think I can memorize this and say it any more than I wrote it here. So I'll just read it to you. When some sort of intervention is introduced very soon after a flare-up in a person's symptomology, when you see improvement, as you surely will from something like nonspecific low back pain or other ailments and sicknesses, you'll naturally assume that whatever you did when your symptoms were at their worst must be the reason for your recovery. That is a classic example of post hoc thinking and not appreciating the reality of regression to the mean. Now, if you don't understand these realities, it's easy to think, I know what I saw, and fall into erroneous beliefs and believe otherwise ineffective interventions are effective. Now, see, this is why when you present someone with evidence and they go, I know what I saw. Yeah, because they have an emotional connection to that. This seems distant to them, the evidence. Because we don't have good thinking processes. We don't know why science and statistics came up in the beginning. It came up to fight this. Now, a couple things I don't want you to get confused. Nobody's saying that science is always right. Certainly it's not. No one's saying that anecdotes are always wrong. What I'm saying is you have to test your experience against the evidence. And when they don't line up, which they often don't, it doesn't make your experiences any less real. Nobody's saying you didn't have a relief from back pain or your clients didn't feel better from doing whatever. It's just saying that the reason that you're ascribing to why it happened is probably wrong. You misjudge the evidence of your own experience. The experience is real, but the reason you're giving for it is probably not as cool or sexy as you thought. And there is no bigger misconceptions about those than in the corrective exercise field. All right? So now you understand, and until you understand this stuff, we're always going to have this anecdotes versus evidence. Now, one little side thing. It's not about sharing anecdotes. I share them all the time. It's how you say it. Right? If you come up to me and go, Nick, I'm going to tell you, one of my favorite ways to go about working with people with low back pain is to do this. You made a taste claim. Right? My favorite ways, one of the ways that I like, one of the things I enjoy doing, one of the things I found my clients like. You didn't make an objective claim. You shared a subjective experience with me. Can't ding you on that. But if you come up to me and go, I do this, and this is the best way to deal with low back pain, I'm hammering you. Because you just made an objective claim. So the problem that we have is all these arguments. People go, oh, you demand evidence for everything. No, we demand evidence when you make an intellectually dishonest claim. The big problem in our field is we shouldn't have these debates because it seems to me that people don't want to be intellectually honest. If I have an experience and I don't have any objective evidence outside my internal validation or inside the doors of my gym or whatever, then I need to speak about that in an intellectually honest manner. In my experience, I found this, and I prefer to do this. I like to do this. Now, when you guys go back and read my stuff, you will see I've bent over backwards to make sure I preface how I say things. And that's why you don't see me get dinged by a lot of these people you may call the evidence-based warrior types. Because nobody's demanding you have to have evidence for everything. They're demanding intellectual honesty. If you don't have good objective evidence for it, then word it differently. Don't make a claim. Don't claim to know things that you don't know. That's all we're asking. If you have objective evidence, hit it. Then you can make the claim based off of this. Now, people can argue whether that's good evidence or not, how a study was done, or whatever. That's a different discussion. But the fact that we keep having these problems shows that we really don't want to be intellectually honest. And that's pathetic. That's all it's about. It's what you don't say. It's not just what you say, it's what you don't say and how you say what you say. Now, what happens when you don't have a lot of evidence for something? Just checking the time here. What time are we going to? 10:30? All right. What happens when there's not a lot of evidence for something? Or there's a lot of conflicting evidence. It's all kind of equal. Well, in that case, I would say that evidence kind of offsets one another. So then we're kind of looked at and go, well, what do I do? You know, how do I come to kind of a more likely, less wrong conclusion about something? Well, I would say actually more important than looking at scientific validity, meaning like this study shows this, like we have studies on it, you look at scientific plausibility. All right, now this is a problem with the evidence-based approach. The articles have been written about this. An evidence-based approach normally looks at outcomes sometimes, but it doesn't look at plausibility. All right? Let me unpack this a little bit. The best, some of you guys are going to go, oh, there's thousands of research studies done on acupuncture. All right? Acupuncture works, but not really. All right? The best studies on acupuncture do like three arms, excuse me. So they'll take one group and they'll give them legit acupuncturists at the points, real acupuncture needles. Other ones will do real needles at random points, right? Because acupuncture is specific points and needles in skin. Then they'll also do one with toothpick acupuncture, right? Then they'll do toothpick acupuncture at the point, and they'll do toothpick acupuncture at the foreleg at random points, right? In the best studies, so these are the ones that was a couple published in from Norway with like several hundreds, both in the same journal. Those are the best studies. There's plenty of studies that just look at observations. Did acupuncture people got better? Right? That just looks at an outcome. But when we control it, those studies show that the toothpick acupuncture at random points, people got relief. Just the same as the people who got the rim stuff. Now, so that falsifies the hypothesis of acupuncture. Right? You don't need needles in the skin and you don't need them at specific points. But there's something to it because as soon as they hit you with those toothpicks, something about that does change your pain perception because people did get relief. Now you think, well, how did they know? Well, a lot of the placebo trials were previously the people knew they were in the placebo group because the person did it. In this one, they put them in vials and plungers, covered it with tissue paper, and you didn't know whether it was a needle or a toothpick. And they decided on the same amount of pressure, so if it was the real needle, it would have gone in. If it's a toothpick, it's a little thicker, it won't just poke you. That's a good study. I did 2 of them. Same results across the board. So does acupuncture work? Yeah. But not for the reason they tell you. Not for some magic undetectable meridian things, or whatever they call them. Right? Your chi lines or whatever. Okay, so this is where it gets a little confusing. So the plausibility of that, in order for some of these chi energies to exist, everything we know about human physiology, and maybe if they're claiming it's connected with something else, would be wrong. Now, what's more plausible? That this is based off some Iron Age, thought process that's probably misjudging based on the knowledge they had that we keep carrying over, or that they know something that we don't? It's more likely that their descriptions of what's going on was wrong for the outcomes that they were finding, which was pain relief. See? Now this is the problem when someone on my side of the thing says, well, acupuncture doesn't work. Bullshit, it does. See, but it's a nuanced discussion. So you have to look at plausibility first. How likely does this fit with the reality that we know? Now in training, you look at principles of adaptation, principles of specificity. How does it line up with those? So I don't need a study to tell me that biceps curls will increase the tissue tolerance of my elbow flexors and increase the motor unit recruitment of my elbow flexors and probably increase the hypertrophy, muscle size, of my biceps. Why? Because it fits with the principle of specificity, that the adaptations to training will be specific to the demands the training puts on the body. But if you start telling me that biceps curls are going to make me taller, that is not, I know it's silly, that's not scientifically plausible. Right? Now you may be able to find some sort of study that looks at that. So you have to look at plausibility first. And that's actually more important. Now that is truly taking a science-based approach, which is why a lot of people take an evidence-based approach and still are believe false things. All right, and the biggest one I'd see is probably acupuncture. I can find 1,000 studies that show it works. It does work, but scientifically, the claims that they make because of it are still implausible. All right, is it based on a logical fallacy? There's a whole bunch of these. You've heard them before, and some people get annoyed by them. By the way, one of the things I found, as we've gone through these debates, do you have evidence for that? Oh, that's this fallacy, that's that fallacy. Is people think it's a strategy just to call it out. Oh, here you go, and there's these memes. Oh, you're like you're that evidence-based person, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, you can make fun of it all you want. It doesn't change the fact that you need to meet this burden of proof. You opened your mouth, you made an objective claim, you can make fun of it. It still demands evidence. That doesn't absolve you from meeting your burden of proof and being intellectually honest. Right? It just goes to show, the way we have this attention just goes to show that we all just want to say whatever we want, not be held accountable for it, and be intellectually dishonest and claim to know things we don't know. Why? Because the generation of gurus that I came up with that did help me a lot, that's how they roll. So, appeal to authority. Now this is often mistaken. A lot of people think that, well, just because somebody is an expert in something and you claim it doesn't make it true. Well, that's true, but a true appeal to authority fallacy is that the person is not truly an expert in what you're quoting them about. So it would be like, your medical doctor who's a cancer specialist makes a claim about organic food by fit, makes a claim about fitness. Squats are bad for your knees or something like that. Right? That's not what that person's an expert in. All right? It's not an appeal to authority fallacy if you say, so-and-so cancer expert makes this claim about something about cancer. That's not a fallacy. Doesn't mean it's true. But you actually have to take that with more weight than someone like me who hasn't studied it. All right, now I love this. My favorite skeptical author is this guy, Guy P. Harrison, by the way. Why is he my favorite skeptical author? Because he bends over backwards to make it conversational and non-adversarial. And one of the failures of people in the skeptical community is a lot of them are assholes. He's not. So I love this quote from him. If a Nobel Prize winning scientist is making a claim, they would get my attention based on their credentials. But without good evidence to support what they're claiming, their claim means nothing. This is a great finishing quote from that. A good skeptic thinks less about who is making the claim and more about what is being claimed. Processes versus conclusions. That conclusion is being held by who said it. So-and-so said it, and they train Olympians, therefore this. You know the problem with that? Because right down the road, there's a coach with just as much experience as just as many successful athletes that makes mutually contradictory claims to you. We all know that. So even the people that want us to take their word for it based on their credentials won't take the word for it on other people with the same credentials who have no better evidence than they do. That's called logical inconsistency. We do that all the time too. Now this is a big one. Appeal to history or appeal to popularity. Just because something has been around for a long time or it's used by a lot of people, well, all those people can be wrong. Yes, they can. Just because something's been around for a long time doesn't make it valid. It just means it can replicate. Because we're all fallible human beings. Just means it can replicate. Doesn't mean the ideas are functional or purposeful. Just means they're good at copying one another. The only thing proven about a practice that's been around for a long time or is popular is that humans keep believing it. So somehow it appeals to our nature, and we've already figured out our nature. Post hoc thinking, not understanding regression to the mean, liking quick answers, misjudging the evidence of our own experience, defaulting towards positive evidence. We're very fallible. I'm going to recommend you a book right now. Another one by Thomas Gillovich called How We Know What Isn't So. How We Know What Isn't So. And the small title of it is it's called like the Fallibility of Human Reason in Everyday Life or something like that. Now, this is all social psychology stuff. It's not really debatable stuff here. You know, it's not like opinions. How we know what isn't so. All right, a couple more. Winding this down. Is the claimer using negative evidence? This is a tough trick to catch, unless you're well versed in looking for it. So, thank you. So in order for a claim to be more likely true, or to meet its burden of proof, which we're going to talk about in the next slide, because it goes along with this one, it needs to have positive evidence in favor of it, not pointing out negative evidence against something else. You see this in alternative medicine a lot. Oh, well, modern medicine kills people. You know, people get infections or whatever. That doesn't validate any sort of other practice. You need positive evidence to demonstrate that that does what you say it does. Right? I love this. Just as plane crashes are no way evidence of flying carpets. Right? Planes do crash, so therefore it makes flying carpets more likely. No, you have to still have evidence that those things are real and they're feasible to use. You need positive evidence. We see this in training. Bringing up the fact that bad trainers are out there causing injury is no way evidence in favor for whatever evaluation criteria that you're making that's supposed to help evaluate injury or whatever. You have to have positive evidence that shows that thing does what you say it does. That's a trick they use. All right, now when people make this sort of argument, where their argument is always attacking other things, they're making a claim, but their way to try to validate it is attacking other things. That shows they're usually unable to meet their burden of proof, that they don't have positive evidence to demonstrate their claim. They're just using negative evidence towards other things. All right? Now that goes along with this. Is the claimer attempting to switch the burden of proof? You hear this normally in law, but this stuff goes right around with law. You know, guilty until proven innocent. Your claim is not guilty of being true, right? Or guilty of being false until proven otherwise. Same thing. Now you have to meet a certain burden of proof. Everything's relative to it. The burden of proof to demonstrate that the logic and reason behind it is sound and valid is solely on the person making the claim, not on the skeptic who doubts it. Right? So what they'll do is they'll flip the burden of proof. The best one is, where is your evidence to disprove my claim? You really can't prove a negative. I can't disprove that Santa Claus doesn't exist. But it's pretty unlikely that it does. All right? If you're making that claim, you have to demonstrate positive evidence to meet your burden of proof that there is this guy who shrinks himself and comes down chimneys and gives kids gifts. Right? So you hear that all the time. Red flag. All right? And when they ask that type of question, it demonstrates that the claimer holds at the false notion that propositions are automatically true, or at least more likely to be true until they're disproven. No. Bias towards positive evidence. Remember? You're going to believe mutually contradictory claims. That is not starting with a null hypothesis. That's being credulous. That's starting with a belief and then backing into it. And that's actually kind of how we're wired. So claims are only considered to be provisionally true. Why I say provisionally true? Because evidence does change as we learn. That's called learning. People go, oh, things change. Yeah, it does. It's called learning. But we're using a very effective process to get there. The most effective that we have. So claims are considered to be provisionally true when they have enough positive evidence to support them, not a bunch of negative evidence. And so I gave you a lot of tools there. And little red flags to look for. Unless you've been trained on these things, they're all very easily to fall into. Especially the anecdotal one. All right, so some final tips, and I'll recommend a few more books for you. All claims must be evaluated individually. This is another thing that people will do. I noticed this early on. They make a claim, and you hit them, why do you believe this, essentially? Which is basically, you know another word for why do you believe this? What's your evidence for this? Right? So then what they'll do is they'll jump. They won't answer because they don't have it. So then they'll make a negative evidence claim. Oh, well, they'll do this. You know what I mean? This is bad. This is bad. Great. We'll go there in a second. Where's your evidence for this? Why are you being so negative? Why can't I believe what I want to believe? That's attacking the messenger. Okay? I just want to know your reason for this. So they'll jump around. When you see that, red flag too. Because if they had it, bang, they'll just give it to you. All right, so you have to evaluate them individually. There's this other thing that people will do is they'll shotgun out like 10 different claims, and they'll get ahead of you. And they think that it's it. When people don't understand this, they don't realize that every one of those claims needs to be evaluated individually, and a lot of times one claim is predicated on the other. All right? And they'll ask sometimes interesting questions that kind of assume answers. The one that jokingly say in science as an idea for it is the question, when did you stop beating your wife? That's assuming that the person already is doing it. Right? Now, I know that's pretty intense. Right? But that's a great example of it. So ask a question, they'll make a claim that already assumes their conclusion in the claim. But wait, first you have to demonstrate that that conclusion is true. We jump ahead, we make leaps. All right, you can't run when you're not being chased. These are all tricks that people use whether they know it or not. All right? Here, challenges of ideas on individuals' character. Right? So you're not your ideas. We've got to learn to not get upset when people are asking us about this, unless they make insults. You're dumb. Or whatever. If you attack people's immutable qualities, that's your problem. That is a challenge on somebody's character. Or you attack their reason, you're just trying to be contrarian. You're just trying to be negative. Well, that's a thing that people do to characterize you, to absolve themselves from meeting the burden of proof of what you asked. It's another trick. So you can't avoid all these erroneous beliefs, but you can make it tougher for them to get in your head, as I showed you. It does take some intellectual work. You should want to do that work. You're doing work here, to be here. You care about believing things are true, and this is the thing that we need to do right now. You need to understand how to filter information. And you'll see so many of these things we talked about are so ripe in the fitness industry, it's an epidemic. Well-trained bodies, untrained minds. I got two takeaways for you. There is nothing this day and age, maybe in 1970, you had to, maybe to get ahead, you maybe had to believe some things that were questionable, that weren't well evidenced. But right now, there is nothing a fitness professional or in any other allied health field needs to believe on bad or insufficient evidence in order to develop a high level of service. One thing I didn't go over, I know probably slightly a few minutes over. People will often make a claim. Here's another fallacious thing. Let's say we have this method, and somebody like me questions the method. They'll say, well, have you taken the course? No. Well, you can't judge it until you've taken the whatever training. Okay, this is another fallacy. Questions or concerns or claims, more specifically, about a given method used on the human body, I can use that to gauge my time over here, are not just claims about the method. They're also claims about biology, physiology, biomechanics. Those things are universal. So when I look at your claim about what you're saying, and it doesn't fit with scientific plausibility of principles of action or biomechanics or neurology, it's unlikely that what you're claiming is true. So I don't need to take the course, because what you're saying is scientifically not plausible. That's another trick people do. Right? So they forget you are making specific claims about how the body works. Unless you are trying to demonstrate that the principles of physiology, physics, and biomechanics cease to exist in your presence, the discussion that we're having is about that. Right? And they don't normally want to have that discussion because it really doesn't fit with that. Okay, last thing. Where does all this baloney detection start? With yourself. You've got to be asking all these things of yourself first. You can't start pointing the finger first until you get really used to doing it. And start asking yourself, what evidence would I need to change my mind about this, to rethink this? What counter evidence is there? Why do I believe this? Right? I love this saying. We're very good lawyers for our own mistakes, but very good judges for the mistakes of others. Right? So you gotta flip that. And I'm telling you what, this is a heavy, Carl Sagan wrote an article in the 80s called The Burden of Skepticism. It takes a lot of practice, but he was right. It's a heavy burden to carry, because you start realizing how intellectually irresponsible a lot of people are. And it is, at first you start kind of feeling like you put a little more into it than others, and you do. But then you get better at becoming a little more understanding about it. Because it's equal to a trained MMA fighter fighting just somebody on the street. Right? And you watch it just get frustrated and erode because you start pointing out logical fallacies and this, they don't know what that is, they've never heard of this, they don't know the difference in scientific studies, and they just get frustrated. And we see it all the time. Right? So, but that's why we all have to get better at these things, because we're playing on different tennis courts sometimes. All right. I appreciate you guys hanging for this. Any questions? I know it's kind of an intense subject, but it's important.